All right, good afternoon, everyone. On behalf of Beyond Baroque Literary Arts Center, I wanted to welcome you to our tribute to the great Ralph Angel. My name is Quentin Ring, and I am the Executive Director of Beyond Baroque. For those of you who don't know, we are a literary space located in Venice, California, and we are dedicated to the artistic possibilities of language through cultivating new writing and presenting contemporary literature and art. Before we get started, I wanted to acknowledge Beyond Baroque's presence on the traditional, ancestral, and unceded territory of the Gabrielino Tongva peoples. We acknowledge the wrong done to these peoples through settler colonialism, genocidal practices, and the violent dispossession of their lands. Beyond Baroque is not only dedicated to the literary arts, we're also very much dedicated to writers, to the individual human beings who make poems and stories out of their lives, their ideas, and their imaginations. We are, in other words, very much a community of and for people. Today, we're here to pay tribute to the work and life of an astonishing poet, to someone whose life and work meant a great deal to many, many poets and poetry readers, Ralph Angel. As a poet, as a translator, as a mentor, as a professor at the University of Redlands, as faculty at the University of Vermont's MFA program, the extent of Ralph's influence was immense. That influence is very much evident in the collection of poets who are gathered here to read from his work. I'm grateful for that work, and I'm grateful that we've gathered a community here virtually to celebrate it. We're going to have some readings for you. We're going to have some videos. We're going to have photos. I think it's going to be a really lovely afternoon. Before we get started, I did want to mention that we'll be posting links to Ralph's books in the chat, as well as to Ralph's website. To our audience, please do feel free to say hello in the chat and to share your remembrances of Ralph. I should mention that if you are posting in the chat and you'd like everyone to see it, including the audience, make sure you select all panelists and attendees for your posts. That way everyone will see it and you'll feel a little bit more of a community as a result. And I should also mention the chat will be saved as a document of everyone's remembrances. So please keep that in mind as well. Excuse me. Finally, I really wanted to say thank you to everyone who worked on this tribute, to our readers, of course, to David St. John, to Jim Natal, and to Elena Karina Byrne, to Jimmy Vega, our operations manager, who is running everything behind the scenes. And most of all, to Mary Angel. Mary is here to introduce the program more fully and to say a few words about her late husband. Thank you everyone for coming. Mary, please feel free to go ahead and take the program from here.
Thank you so much, Quentin. Hi, everyone. I would really like to thank all of you for joining us today in this celebration of my husband, Ralph Angel. Last Saturday marked the 1-year anniversary of his passing on March 6th, which I still somehow can't fully comprehend. And the world has truly never been the same since then, because he died right at the cusp of the pandemic. So I've spent much of this past year in lockdown, and I'm so grateful to my family and my friends and everybody who helped me get through that. But today we're here to celebrate Ralph's life, and I always wanted to have some type of a celebration like this, or in person at Beyond Baroque, particularly because that's where Ralph and I had our first unofficial date. Was at a Beyond Baroque reading 13 years ago after a reading in honor of David St. John, and we all went to La Cabana Mexican restaurant afterwards. So that was the beginning of my life with Ralph. And fortunately for me, Beyond Baroque actually contacted me about having this event. So I'm very, very grateful for that. I know that each one of you are here because you love Ralph, and he loves you. He touched so many people's lives. I mean, many of you I haven't even met, but I know of you. I've heard of you. I've heard Ralph talk of you. I've heard wonderful stories, and I apologize to anyone who heard about his death for the first time from my texts or my emails about this event. And I really do hope that a day will come when I can meet all of you. I've just been so deeply touched by all of the letters and the cards I've received from students, from parents of students, from friends of Ralph's, telling me their stories about him or how he changed their lives. He really was deeply loved by so many. And I am so grateful because I've had him in my life. I'm also really, really fortunate because I have been able to read his work since he's passed. To me, you know, I would lie in bed on sleepless nights and read through his poems, and somehow that made me really feel close to him. And he left behind such an incredible body of work. He always said that writing poetry is what he was put on this earth to do. That was his most important purpose here. And he does have a glorious collection. There's 6 books of poetry, and also just the end of 2019, there was a beautiful art book that he did that was published by Dark Spring Press called Entropia, which was just brilliant. It's available on his website. And there's also 2 manuscripts that he completed that have not been published yet. And I'm going to get those published because it's truly my mission to make sure his legacy goes on. I know that he will live on in his work and in our hearts. So let's begin. We're going to open with an audio reading of Ralph reading a poem, Bright Example, one of his poems from Your Moon, followed by a video montage of photos, accompanied by the song that Ralph played constantly in the background while he worked, which is Peace, Peace by Bill Evans. You know, it's impossible to capture a life as rich and full as Ralph in a few minutes, but this is just a sampling of his life and of his many travels, places where he taught, like Slovenia, Italy, Paris, Vermont, and beyond. So enjoy.
A few stones, day after day, dreamily walked beside me. Houses and trees and bright red orioles, if I think back on it, in their privacy. For now, the elm trees swarm with bees. Their hum could keep me there. Your sky is blue and huge and open. I think about the locals, like people screaming. I think it's a dog he's carrying, but it's a paper bag. She stays closer to the gravel. She leans against it, but prefers the wooden fence. Another car turns over. Another sputters. And you, my dear skeleton, in your pajama bottoms, say hello to everyone. Another rock, a plastic rose, toy animals. Can you believe it? A flag, a poem.
Thank you. And now I'd like to introduce our first poet of the evening, Andrea Beltran.
Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you, Mary, for this invitation, and thank you, Quentin and Jimmy and everyone else who gathered us all here today. And to remember Ralph, I'm grateful to share this space with all of you. That is difficult to follow, but I'm going to start by reciting one of Ralph's most recent poems, which is untitled. Breezy cold and children running, one after another, in a street full of skyscrapers. The sun rising somewhere on the wing of a plane, a one-winged bird on the head of a god in the plaza. Goodbye from the pain of my body. My father patting the cushion next to him. In the air, come, sit. The poet Aracelis Girmay says that the ways we come to our language is always, or are always, full of other people, and Ralph is one of those people for me. I was first introduced to his work and then to him in 2000, and it was by his dear friend, the late Jack Myers. And Ralph and I remained snail mail correspondents ever since. It's been just over a year and it still feels quite difficult to articulate this loss, but I thought how better to try than in his favorite language, poetry. So this poem borrows a couple of his lines. The what of which you are a part. Of course, you would leave when the apricot blooms, while the morning glory weaves along a wall of mesquite in my yard. Was it you that left that nest on my front lawn, or the myth you made of yourself, low-key buzzing city of yourself? Thank goodness I don't have plastic grass. It makes a fake day, an ache day, more real. Your death, a sudden shift in weather, unpredictable. The weather's old and personal. It doesn't have an end. A fact of one's life, you'd say. There's no traffic here, something you would lament. Today, the letter carrier clipped my prickly pear with her truck and left my mailbox empty. Last night, a plate of beets arranged like a tower. One more thing for me to take down. Oh, beet tower, the things a body can make, the things a body can take, the things a body can break down. I pull open the door to the fridge. Out flies a fruit fly. I continue to be astonished by the things that survive. Tonight, your fog is everywhere. And for once, I want to keep my sorrow to myself. Thank you. And now I would like to introduce Molly Bendall.
Thank you. Thank you, Andrea. That was really lovely. And it's wonderful to be here. Thank you to Quentin and Jimmy and everyone who's here. I'm so glad to be celebrating Ralph. I first met Ralph over 30 years ago in Los Angeles. And the first thing I thought was, what a great name for a poet. Because it has a sense of the quotidian and a sense of the eternal. Just kind of like Frank Ocean, the singer, you know, but Frank had to make it up. Ralph had it naturally. And that's also what I love about Ralph's poems. They bring together notions of the everyday with a deep sense of the eternal and timeless. I also think about Ralph's poems, and what they taught me, I think, was this including in a vibrant way the little hinges of our existence. Those properties are things that allow for turns, for one thing to connect to the next, and also those points on which everything depends. Ralph was really masterful in his poetry at idioms. And these small gestures and syntax, but he used them in such effortless ways. But what I most remember about Ralph himself was a sense of humor. We used to have Halloween parties, and our daughter Vivian's birthday was on Halloween. So we'd have big celebrations. And in fact, our whole street had a big street party and celebration for Halloween. And Ralph always came in costume. And one Halloween, he came as Dennis Rodman, the basketball player, and Ralph had dyed his hair this neon bright blonde, and he wore a basketball jersey and shorts. And another Halloween, he came, well, this had been a few weeks after the death of John Denver in a plane crash. And Ralph came as the ghost of John Denver. And he had on a blonde wig with bangs and wire rim glasses and a guitar slung over his shoulder. So maybe a little in bad taste, but hilarious nonetheless. So I think about Ralph's silliness and his love of fun. But his poems, of course, had an intimacy and a soulfulness that is immortal. And I'm going to read a poem from Your Moon. And it's called Three Figures. This morning, I'm savoring a taste of apricot in the air. Out of respect or gratitude, I suppose. For I would remember a nightmare and have to utterly shattered tell it to more than one person, so that it might come to mean that I'm free, finally, of another disgusting dead thing of me. I stepped down from my lovely bed into a foreign country. Out of respect, no doubt, for the sweet air crowded with people and traffic, and the dog that fumbles with a newspaper before sitting down to read it at the edge of the square, where everything you forgot or might need is spread out on the pavement. I'll never tell you about the time I suffered most. What's most painful is most hidden, even from me. Anyway, there's nothing I can do about it. It emerges here and there, I'm sure, and you could find it if you want to. If moseying around the breads and watercolors and vegetables and necklaces is somehow running away from myself, it doesn't bother me. In that second before waking, there were 3 figures, children maybe, a boy and 2 girls. Maybe my sisters and me, with their backs to the city, staring at the water. I like to think of it that way. Thank you. And thank you, Ralph. I'm going to introduce Elena Karina Byrne.
Thank you, Molly. And thank you, Beyond Baroque and Mary, for this incredible event and the amazing audience that has shown up. So I'm going to read just one of Ralph's forthcoming poems in a magazine called Terminus. But I wanted to first say that ever since I first met Ralph in 1991, he's definitely a unique person, someone who completely embodied poetry's compassionate intellect. And he also, combined with that, seemed to embody music's cadence that's multi-layered when it came through him with humor. He had an incredible sense of humor, as has already been mentioned. And it was a very slightly irreverent, slightly loving humor for whoever he happened to meet at the time. And he just was the type of person, whether you met him once or you knew him for years, you never forget him. And in that way, I also see his work as being without definition. And thank God, right? I think he would feel that way. So I'm honored to read this newer poem of his. It's just untitled, A Flurry of Snow. A flurry of snow, 3 birds in a row, the kind of light you could paint to. I learned to stand on a wall of water and to fall down the bougainvillea. The night always still, the moon beneath the wind. My body demands of your echo. My body sinks like a butterfly, like a handful of lamplight and crickets. Yip, yip, coyote, the echo born in my heart upon your mirror reflected. Thank you, Ralph. And our next brilliant poet is Gillian Connolly. Please welcome her.
Hi. That was beautiful, Elena. And I first met Ralph 30 plus years ago in an airport in Los Angeles for a job interview. I can't imagine a worse place to meet someone, but somehow we remained really close friends. And one of my fondest memories of Ralph, I have many, but one is that it was the Los Angeles Times Book Review Festival. It was at least 2 decades ago. Many of you here right now probably remember the occasion. We were on a panel. I don't remember what the topic of the panel was, but Ralph was the MC. And I'm going to talk about Ralph's humor, like Molly so beautifully did. Ralph really knew how to work a room, and it was in an amphitheater it was a really hot day, and it was really crowded. And for some reason, we all had to wait for quite a long time. And Ralph was pretty expert at coming up to the microphone and sort of joking around and calming people down. And when it actually began, Ralph started by getting everyone to be really quiet. And in the inimitable way that he had, he paused a moment, and then he thanked everyone for coming to his bar mitzvah. It was really wonderful. I'm going to read "The River Has No Hair to Hold On To," which is one of my favorite poems from Ralph. It's from the collection Neither World. The river has no hair to hold on to. It's only common sense, not that they know the score, they don't avoid it. And so one's life story is begun on a paper napkin and folded into a coat pocket to be retrieved later when it's darker and cooler and closer, and onward to rockier ground, where conversation is impassable and human beings matter more than the light that glimmers beneath the horizon, before sinking into our own inaudible sigh, a long way from these fur-covered hands. And somehow the deal is struck. Money gets made, and the small shocks one undergoes for no reason, the bus driver handing you a transfer, a steamy saxophone ascending the jungle. The city lays down its blanket of rippling lamplight, as though exhaustion too was achieved by consensus. And what one does and how one feels have nothing to do with oneself. Now, this can't be the place, but it must be the road that leads there, always beginning where morning is slow and hazy, suffering to get somewhere with all the memorable mistakes along the way, piecing them together, arriving, believing that one arrives at a point different from the starting point, admitting things still aren't clear. A rag doll on a dark lawn injures the heart as deeply as the salt sea air filling one's lungs with the sadness once felt in a classroom. A sadness older than any of us, and the dogs barking, challenging cars. And the willows lining the sidewalk, lifting their veils to the inscrutable surface of wood. Someone is trying to get a message through. Someone thinks you'll understand it. And I'd like to close by mentioning the qualities of Ralph's poetry that I always admired the most, the sense of place and no place that's in the poems. There's such a strong sense of Los Angeles. There's also such a strong sense of a much more wider global world. And I think Tomas Solomon, who has also left us and was a dear friend of Ralph's, framed it the best when he talked about Ralph's the presence of a kind of Sephardic wisdom in his writing, combined with the speeding light of Los Angeles, which I think is a really good description of his work. Okay, love you, Ralph. I'm gonna introduce now Mark Cox. Please welcome him.
Thanks, Gillian. That was really lovely. I'm very grateful to have been asked to participate today to honor Ralphie. One of the times I suppose I felt closest to him was when we were both doing eulogies for our brother Jack Myers during his memorial in Dallas years ago. It's kind of unbelievable to me to find myself here at Ralph's memorial today. But it is a further affirmation of just how essential and sustaining friendship is in this life, I think. And it was my privilege to call him friend for some 33 years. Ralph was an old soul, and his art is one of intuition and grace. And like so much of our humanity, it is at once simple and profound and oblique and yet perfectly clear. As I was thinking about his poetry this weekend, I was reminded of the many late nights we spent in the dorm at Vermont College, seemingly the last two awake. I don't think his body ever adapted very well to Eastern time. His door would be open and I could hear light tones of some exotic music. Ralph was always introducing us to some musician or group we'd never heard of before. And anyway, I'd be drawn down the hall and have a chance to really talk. Ralph's poetry is like that music to me now. His tones play in my head as if his voice is coming from an open door down the hall. And it means so much to have him live on in this resonant and kind of haunting way. And I know there are countless other friends and readers who feel the same. I'm going to read his poem Among Fields of Shocked Corn from Neither World. And what about what the slow undulation of farmland is doing to the sky? There is one quiet cloud there, keeping the world at bay, tearing itself apart. Sugar maples, red oaks, the hardwoods are the most fragile, a shivering beauty, the long fall to dirt heaven. I know now how a farmhouse was the invention of distance. The hay is rolled, the silos gleam as if there's something left worth saving. And the old farmer on his tractor plowing salt into the furrows so the man might never get up, stand on his good 2 feet, sleep with his wife and walk away again. I own less and less of myself. I rented this sucker to get out of town, and now I want to drive up onto that median and turn it around. I have one last favor to ask of just about everyone. Whatever you do, don't confuse Ralph Angel with Ralph Angel. Today, he loves everything too much. And I want it simple, a small breath filling the world with tremendous music. Among fields of shocked corn, you are stepping into your car. Stranger, my love, you really are. Place your hands on my chest. You can trust me. See, they go right through. The next reader will be Jody Gladding.
Thanks, Mark. This is the local language. The way she puts her fingers to his chest when she greets him. The way an old man quiets himself and that another man waits and waits a long time before speaking. It's in the gaze that steadies, a music he grows into, something about Mexico, I imagine, how he first learned about light there. It's in the blank face of every child, a water that stands still amid the swirling current, water breaking apart as it leaves the cliff and falls forever through its own magnificent window. The way a young woman holds out a cupped hand and doves come to her. The way a man storms down the street as if to throw open every door. And the word she mouths to herself as she looks up from her book for that word, as she repeats it. That's from Twice Removed, and it's called Local Language, though no one actually speaks in it. There's a man who waits a long time to speak, and there's a woman mouthing a word to herself. And what I love about Ralph's poetry, and what I loved about Ralph, was his incredible quiet. There were a lot of things I loved about Ralph. I loved his way of sidling up to you, and his ineffable handwriting, and his chortle that would break into uncontainable laughter, and his willingness to be astounded and outraged and outrageous and a perfect gentleman, all at the same time or in quick succession. I'm remembering a residency at Vermont College when we were teaching a workshop together, and Ralph had just quit smoking and he went everywhere with those little tea tree oil toothpicks. And in the last workshop, Ralph came in last, and the whole workshop had already assembled, and he looked around and everyone in the workshop had one of those toothpicks in their mouth. And Ralph got all like wide-eyed and said, "Oh my God, there are 10 of me." and really, you know, if just for a moment, who wouldn't have wanted to be Ralph Angel? And then there was another residency, and it was a winter one, and it was one of those perfect winter days. It was probably 5 below zero, and perfectly clear sky and snow cover, all crystalline snow cover. And I had just driven in from where I live, which is about a little north of Montpelier. And I have lived there. I've lived here for 30 some years now. And Ralph and I always had this like thing about, you know, cities and country. He claimed to be terrified of nature, and I'm pretty terrified of cities. So I had just come in, and it was early morning, and I was crossing the green, although it was white at that moment, and we kind of met on the green, and we were for a moment enveloped in this Arctic cold and the perfect quiet of it, and just stood there for a moment, and he said, "Okay, I get it. This is why you live here." He was right, and I miss him with all my heart. Thank you, all of you, for making this happen, for bringing Ralph here again. And our next reader is Stella Hayes.
Thank you, Jody. And thank you to Mary, David, Yelena, and Quentin, and everyone in Beyond Baroque. I'm so honored to be invited to participate in Ralph's tribute, my dear friend. It was Sunday, December 15th, 2019, that I texted Ralph. I said, I'm in town for the weekend, visiting my mother. And I know this is late notice. It was 6:30 in Santa Monica. My mother and I were ending a heated discussion about an allergy she developed that morning that only lived in her mind. And clearly she needed a break from me. Ralph knew all about my mother and me. I didn't expect to hear back from him that night. let alone right away. The text said, "Hello, sister. Mary and I will be sitting down to dinner in an hour." "Great," I texted back. "I'll crash your dinner," punctuating the sentence with a smile emoji. Before he and Mary could say no, I wrote, "I'll be there in an hour." I got into my mother's Toyota Corolla that only 2 years before my sister, on her visit with our mother, drove into a colossal blue recycling bin outside our mother's carport because she too got into a heated discussion about allergens that my mother was sure lived in her apartment. And the next morning, my sister got on a plane back to New York like a teenager without telling my mother about the huge crater she left on the driver's side of the car. Ralph and I laughed to no end about it at breakfast one summer. And as expected, on a Sunday night, the 10 and the 110 moved with Sunday night LA speed. I got to South Pasadena as Mary was plating the chicken breast, potatoes, and asparagus as she had to generously divide in 3. That was the last time I saw Ralph and Mary. Ralph and I go back decades. We were out of touch for far too long. 7 years ago, we got back in touch and we started where we had left off as though no time had passed. I wrote to him. I said I'm writing poetry again. He was loving, supporting, and encouraged me in my work. He had a broad smile and a contagious laugh. We would laugh so much whenever we spoke on the phone or when we would get together on my trips back in LA. He had a way of making me happy whenever I saw him, tuning into and making less heavy whatever I was struggling with at the time. Today I celebrate Ralph, not mourn him. I will mourn him tomorrow, as I have every day since March 6, 2020. I miss you. I will always miss you, my dear friend. I'm going to read a really, really wonderful poem of his that I chose. It's from Exceptions and Melancholies, untitled. Surely everyone is born unfinished, could use a great deal of life today, and dies enough to keep the wound from healing. And a cry comes close, a siren cuts across it. It's the dying that torments us, taking something and in a hurry, as if it were a beauty that one couldn't bear, taking something more. Surely everyone suffers to the knees of the heart when their heart is open, and I don't recover. A cry cuts across it, the red camellias cut across it. When rain drips from the eaves, drums the stepping stones after a storm has cleared the face of everything. Porches and cancer, pine trees, the bird on the white wing, and the neighborhood blind dog. Little dwarf, half hairless, half lame, punishes the curb, the treacherous ivy. Our little neighborhood comedian, choke chain, chap puffed out, yeps at the air, yepping the length of ultimate driveways, sideways, backwards, until another dog barks back. Look out. Each step, a shock of joy. Please welcome the next reader is Rec Jackson.
Hello, I want to thank, first of all, everyone at Beyond Baroque and the other readers, and especially to Mary. I want to start by reading one of his many untitled poems. It's from a little chapbook called Strays that was published by Foundlings Press in late 2019. But here in the city, there are signs and crowds in the street, and a girl on the balcony, and cars that have to get through the deep shallows, or else. And there are ashes falling down the sky, from the palace of arms to the fountain of tears, and upon the whispering aspens. And there are naked feet and white flowers from their hideaways, distant mother. an angel comes to me and taps my lips. An angel. How fitting for Ralph to end that poem and for us to think of it that way now. And how consoling that maybe, in a sense, he's become that angel tapping our lips with his own poem still. I first met Ralph and, well, got to know Ralph. I'd met him briefly before, but at Lake Bled in Slovenia, almost precisely at the spot where I would be standing now if that were not a virtual but a real background at Lake Bled in Slovenia. I met him through some common friends. I got to know him through some common friends, Aleš Debliak and Tomáš Šalaman, who also passed. And that continued through the years. We had him at Chattanooga a couple of times for our writers' conference. I remember him sitting on the couch and students on the floor around him. He was always bemused, as he always was at Vermont College too later on, and had, well, I think Jody described it best, a kind of little chortle, bemused laugh all the time. I told him, we used to talk a lot about jazz, and I told him once about Miles Davis' notion, don't play what's there, play what's not there. And that somehow I thought that many of his poems, most of his poems, I guess, really did that. But now I'm kind of haunted by those lines from Privilege of Silence, where he says, the dead don't leave, some part of us is missing. So there's always this presence, no matter how absent he is. And I remember also talking to him about how I loved Ben Webster and thought that his poems are kind of like that, with that kind of gentle voice where you could hear the breath, really the soul behind the music. It was really kind of an incredible experience. He's somebody that's going to be dearly missed. My students here in Chattanooga who had him back in the 90s when he was here still miss him and know him. He's never going to be forgotten. He's a wonderful poet and a superb human being. So our next reader is Sarah McClay.
Rick, thank you. That's really beautiful. Thanks so much to Quentin and Mary and everyone who's here and who's put this together. I want to start by reading a poem of Ralph's that I've loved for a long time called Subliminal Birds, and then I'll say a little bit more. Subliminal birds. Like the infant, wriggling free, tasting air, hollering from the blue cliffs of Echo Park, like clear wind, like ashes rising from the tips of leaves, or a wooden storefront in the must of towering construction. And all that occurs while waiting or forgetting, the sound of a train in the heart's distance. All that coming and going, so much life spreading its wings in both worlds, soaring beneath the crust of the handshake and signature, between the lines of stories we tell in order to be heard here, in order to feel confidently at home. Right here, where walls of survival are windows, a whole galaxy of stars in the nod of the proprietor of a carnival shooting gallery, where ecstatically, with the blinds drawn, a woman tumbles from her bed into the swirling green waters of an oriental carpet, where children school kids in gray and white uniforms twirl until the buildings are dust on the parched lips of a storm. A shimmering ribbon, an indelible, radiant haze. I met Ralph in May of 1997 at a reading at Borders that he was doing with David St. John, who I hadn't seen for 20 years. And within the next 3 years, I was able to start studying with both of them, being mentored by them here in Los Angeles with David, and starting in 2000 at Vermont College with Ralph, and some of the other folks that are with us today. It's really great to see Mark and Rick and Jody here, to know Mary will be here. I was pretty sure that that's what I wanted to do, and I ended up applying to more than one place, and I got in to 2 places, and I was being kind of heavily pursued by the other place, and I had to figure it out. And I had 2 dreams, one about the other place, and one in which Ralph entered the dream. We were at a party. In the dream, he showed up as a priest with a white collar and black shirt. And basically, and then the dream was in black and white, which never happens to me. And basically he said that he really wanted me to come and study at his church. So I did. And he ended up becoming one of my key mentors in the collection that became my first book. And he believed in it and prodded me to get it out there. And one of the things that I always hold close about what Ralph would say over and over is follow your hunches. It's really good advice. I want to finish with just a couple of words that I wrote about his work. I've written a few times. This one is about that poem, Implied Simile. Some poems ask to be taken as similes for the thing they're getting at, describing, finding a way to talk about, but they refuse to give us directly the other side of the simile, which creates more space and mystery, and which helps to throw us into the midst of their embodiment of, enactment of, an experience, rather than leaving us on the clever outside of it. And what if the other side of the simile is the ineffable, the very thing that defies being named? It is the hinge of like that pulls at the phenomena of the world at the moments of direct statement. And this hinge is then extended by other words, words that propel us through the poem, give it another dimension, curve it in a way into some place we can't quite see, but know by the way the hair goes up on our arms. I want to introduce my dear friend, Holiday Mason, who's reading next.
Wow, that was beautiful. Sarah, everybody that's read, beautiful choices. I was having an experience listening to Molly read. Molly lives nearby here in Venice. And there was a siren going by, Molly, when you were reading. And I could hear the siren here. and I could hear the siren through the Zoom. And then the dog was howling like a crazy hound dog. And to me, that was sort of like an embodiment of the way Ralph had the courage to tolerate the sensitivities of a lot of different dimensions at the same time. And that takes a lot of courage and a lot of being able to be in, as the title of the book, Neither World, This World and Another World. And so, you know, his poems, first of all, it's such a bounty to hear. Oh my God, the work, it's just stunning. And every time I hear it or read it, I start wanting to work, and I can hear more deeply. He was extremely tender, extremely curious, and a very, very complex person. And Molly, also you used the word hinge, and I had made a note that he hinged the ephemeral to this tangible realm so that we can feel more deeply that relationship between both. Mary was a friend of mine. Ralph also, and I'm not rehearsed in what I'm saying, but like Sarah, I had the privilege of working with Ralph on my first collection. And somehow, I don't know how this happened, he was able to transmit this information about how to make a book in much the same way that his poems were, so that the poems were talking together. And I would give him the book, he'd say, no, not that. And then very intuitively, I would rearrange. And so because of that, it was transmitted to me so that I can carry that forward in making books. And it was a huge gift. And then Mary, who I love very much, and thank you everybody for putting this together. Ralph and Mary met after a New Year's Eve where Mary and I were walking through Santa Monica, and on New Year's Eve, there was some tradition, I don't remember Mary what lineage, but where she took 2 blades of grass and she tied them together and she said, I want to meet my beloved. And so she did that year. And I watched their love transform both of their lives and make them huger people. So I loved Ralph and I love Mary, and it's quite an offering here. And I'm going to read a poem in Your Moon, which seems to me to be a love letter. Nature, nature, looking through trees strangely into nature. A window, an air conditioner, a wall covered with ivy. The book on your lap, your head tilted back, like handling cups or pennies, a shovel, a stone, like where an arm is found or where the tangle of limbs go, a bookshop, a fruit stand. You wake up and there you are. And there you are. Do we have any cookies or something nice? Toward the east outstretches the shadow, on the left a plywood lake. Gods and horses playing in the fountain. A conch shell, a robe, the swallows, the sandstorms, a pink fire in the clouds. And the generator, the chain, and the pulley, unheard of, laughter, and prayer. The long exhalation of baskets and flutes, of bracken, of reed, of cypress and olive, pelvis and spine, 3 shoes on a doorstep, of human unfinished, the spirit in time. The spirit in time. And now I have the privilege of introducing Atta Moharari, and I'm looking forward to hearing and thank you all. Much, much love.
Hello, everybody. Thank you, Quentin and Jimmy at Beyond Baroque. And thank you, Mary and David, and Jim and Elena. And thank you, Ralph, for bringing us all together. I'll read another one of Ralph's entitled poems. When time settles in and I can't wander away and can't not think of you as the coming one, living my life, standing by an open window, as if worn out from work or some arduous commute. When afternoon puts a blue sky and white clouds upon extraordinary buildings, and tufts of cottonwood rise up 22 floors, like a lake that will not dim, or an island the color of olives, or the bright blur of a mountain behind them, or that the one voice that rises isn't personal, or that car honking, like the breeze in my shirt from every direction, without so much as an evening. That poem also comes from the Foundlings Press Dre's chapbook series. Briefly, I was one of those students who Richard Jackson mentioned. Looking in the comments, I noticed Stuart Deschel's comment. I think when I met Ralph, he was reading with Stuart Deschel in Chattanooga, Tennessee. And on that first meeting, I ended up hanging out with Ralph a lot, and he was in the hotel room before he left, folding his clothes and packing. And it was the first time I had seen someone pack so marvelously. And it all made sense that he was a laser, just doing what he was supposed to be doing, from the curls on his head to the shoes on his feet. It all made sense to me. And when I moved to Los Angeles, I met with Ralph in Santa Monica the first few days there, and Mary lived there. And there's a park in which there's a ring of rose bushes. And I had read in books or seen in movies or heard the saying, you know, stop and smell the roses. But this guy actually stopped and smelled the roses. When he walked to the park, he smelled every single rose he could put his nose on. And of course I followed suit, and he was cracking up. And it wasn't a one-time off. We went to the Huntington Gardens later that year because they had some sort of rose bush fabulous thing going on. You could go there, and we smelled every rose. There must have been thousands of them, and read the names out loud and laughed. And those are just a couple things that come to my mind. And thanks again, everyone, for putting this together. Our next participant is the poet, Jim Natal.
Thank you, Atta. And thanks to all of you who came to pay your respects to a truly remarkable person. Well, I knew Ralph, but I didn't really know Ralph, certainly not as well as some of the readers here today. But we became closer after Ralph got together with Mary, who is a dear friend of ours. And I'm Mary's surrogate in Los Angeles for her brother Greg, back in our shared hometown of Chicago. Ralph was a quiet private cipher who seemed to notice everything. I envied him for his stillness and his cool. And he was so cool. His love of jazz and film, his songbirds. Beyond his own incredibly distinctive poetic voice, he gave voice to the poetry of others as a teacher and mentor, and also as a wonderful translator of the work of Federico Garcia Lorca. And that's no small accomplishment, because the Lorca estate is very particular about who they allow to translate the work. Ralph was honored and approved by them, which is why I chose one of his Lorca translations to read today. It's from this collection, a poem of the Deep Song. And the poem I chose is in 3 sections. And it's got facing pages of Spanish and English. I'll just read the Spanish title. And then each of these, and very much as has been mentioned, this one deals with place. The title of the sequence is 3 Cities, Tres Ciudades, and this first one is Malagueña. Death goes in and out of the tavern. Black horses and sinister people travel the deep roads of the guitar. And there's a smell of salt and menstrual blood in the feverish spikenard at the shore. Death goes in and out of and into the tavern goes death. Barrio de Cordoba, Cordoba barrio. In that house, they defend themselves against the stars. The night is thrown down. Inside, there is a young, dead girl with a flesh-colored rose hidden in her hair. On the bars of her window, 6 nightingales mourn for her. Displaying their guitars, everyone sighs. Baile, dance. Carmen is dancing down the streets of Sevilla. She has long white curls and brilliant eyes. Little girls, close the curtains. A yellow snake is coiled in her mind, and she dreams that she's dancing with lovers of days gone by. Little girls, close the curtains. The streets are deserted, but in the background, Andalusian hearts in search of ancient thorns are uncovered. Little girls, close the curtains. The next reader is Ralph's colleague and great friend, Mary Ruefle. She couldn't participate live today, but through the wonders of the technology that we've all learned to embrace, she's here with us. And following Mary's video segment, our next reader will be Arthur Vogelsang. Mary Ruefle.
He was my friend for 26 years, and I never imagined life on earth without him. Friendship is a mystery and a miracle. Where do the people we love come from, and what did we do to deserve them? I've seen his face flooded with joy, like the day he rode the cherry picker, a kind of crane, high above the Vermont College campus and waved to us below. And I've seen his face flooded with pain. But mostly it is his voice I remember. And the silent moments when he stood listening to something he loved, a film, a song, a bird. Every summer we took long, aimless drives, always knowing we would end the day in Adamant, a village we discovered by accident and revisited whenever we could. There we would swim during the day and return at night to hear piano recitals. But that first day, the day of discovery, he stood at the edge of Sodom Pond and listened to the bullfrogs until time stood still. I was also with him when he saw fireflies for the first time and did not think they were real. He thought they were a joke the night played on us. But they were real, and he was real, and our friendship was real, and the rest is, if not silence, quiet. Only quiet. Only quiet, as even a soft rain quiets the city, even my thinking, while my neighbor plays the piano and a finch awakens. Not so much the idea of the past, but in hope that it goes away. We met long ago, and so begin to meet again. Speak kindly the sad song written for no one.
Hi, I'm Arthur Vogelsang. The poem I'm reading is titled History. The first poem in Ralph's first book, Anxious Latitudes. There it is, with Ralph on the back, which was published in 1986. Though I published 6 poems from it in the American Poetry Review in 1983 and 1984. You should know about the setting of the poem that Ralph worked in the Union Pacific Railroad freight yard in Seattle while in high school and college. He went to college at the University of Washington in Seattle. But he worked in the freight yard for years, high school and college. The poem History, one doesn't know what I just told you about Ralph's work history when one encounters this, most readers anyway. So history is history. History 1. The engine's eternal rumbling, I never get used to it. Night smoke, steel dust, the sickly saw and scree of wheels holding the rail. Never get used to rigid awake, throat full of ashes and oil, tons of knuckle, tons of tightening slack, of erosion, impact, tons of freight car. In the eyes, spittle. Never a that drifts from the cold forest of thinking that a man's father and a man lights a cigarette and walks on dirt and thinks he is building a train. We know the task so well that knowledge is a blindfold for eating coal. Proceeds no school, gathering flat stones and pieces of dull glass on the lake. The mute chorus of tree bark and twigs, feathers, with rat tracks are drawn into the strange mutterings of men walking toward death. And the smell of shit and straw, the horribly normal expressions of human beings reduced to animal heart and animal bone. Pennies on the track so that the wheels might smear them into something new. Slowly, methodically, clanking and bumping over the switches, a long drag is pulled out toward the main. 40, maybe 60 cars. And the last unfolds the whole of the north end. Out of emptiness, a cat squeal, and the cat scrambling across the tracks. A newspaper lifts up and touches back, shreds of cloth on a broken post. A moth, dizzy and circling, and an old guy coughing, stumbling out of some bushes. He watches an owl scissor past the tower. He looks down to twisted cable and busted cans, to a crumpled shoe as pale as dirt. He shoves his hand in his pocket and looks over at me. The next reader is going to be Jonathan Wells. Here's Jonathan.
Thank you, Arthur. And thanks to Mary for including me, Quentin. David St. John introduced me to Ralph when I was at Fine Art Work Center 15 years ago. And Ralph and I had dinner every night that week. And during the day, instead of doing what I was supposed to be doing, I read Twice Removed over and over again, trying to understand it, figure out what it was. I never told Ralph, but I imagine him saying, relax, just read the words. What struck me then and what strikes me now, hearing so many of the poems again, is their oblique quality, their everyday quality, and their piercing quality. Many years later, I was having a problem with how to write something, and Ralph, he said, come with me. And he took me to the Arlington Labyrinth in Pasadena. And he didn't say anything. We talked about other things. And I walked through the labyrinth, and a few days later, I understood why he'd taken me there, and I knew what to do. So when my daughter moved to Los Angeles this year, I urged her to go to the labyrinth, and she did. And she knew Ralph because Ralph had stayed with us. And one remarkable evening, babysat for all our kids. And the thing they all remember about him is the ringtone on his phone, a flip phone at the time, Big Papa by Notorious B.I.G. Because Twice Removed is the book that I read most and read first, I'd like to read a poem from it called This. Today, my love, leaves are thrashing the wind, just as pedestrians are erecting again the buildings of this drab, forbidding city. And our lives, as I lose track of them, are the lives of others, derailing in time and getting things done. Impossible to make sense of any one face or mouth, though each distance is clear and you're miles from here. Let your pure space crowd my heart, that we might stay a while longer amid the flying debris. This moment, I swear it, isn't going anywhere. Thanks. The next reader is Jan Wesley.
Good afternoon, everybody. It is beyond an honor to be here. Thank you all very much. Of course, beyond Baroque and Mary and so many fabulous poets. I think I'll read first because, like Jonathan, I started with Twice Removed and plowed through this book as many times as I've gone through anything in my life. And I'd read it out of the book, except it's also marked up. I wouldn't be able to see the words. So I'm going to read Breathing Out. Now you are crossing a wide street at night, anxious in the traffic and rushing to get to the bakery before closing. What could be more breathtaking than your beauty, if not in my arms, at least on that side of peril? That's why I'm yelling at the driver of the pickup truck I just slammed into. So much did I want to park there and wait for you. May I never live with love by surviving love and loving blocks and days away. The most ancient of the dead desire, earthly, our getting born again, alone without choice. Children fill the air, the spices and the rugs of the bazaar. I buy you tulips. They are yellow and bright. The port is dark and glittering blue airplanes hover there, like clarity itself, like faintly wailing sirens attached to absolutely nothing, like socks and sweaters and the blanket that slipped somehow from your legs while I tidied up the balcony. So lost in your book are you tonight. Ralph, as I was a student and very luckily a friend, and I was at Vermont and got to work with him there. And those 4 semesters at Vermont were so wonderful. And Ralph was beloved and hilarious. Sometimes he would have to get up in the evening to run one of the meetings about the agenda for the day and the agenda for tomorrow. And it was just, people were laughing and rolling and having the best time because this mundane kind of necessity was something that he made come alive and make it all about people, which he did so much. One of the things he said, I remember, is that you only need 4 tools for writing, and they are language, imagination, experience, and humanity. And the humanity part is what he was, and what I think about and feel all the time when I'm writing, trying to make sure I attend to that part as he always did. The thing that Ada was talking about his smelling the roses and everything, Ralph seemed to, first of all, he's one of the greatest observers of anybody I've known. He would look at everything, he would hear everything, and he would smell everything. He would taste everything with a real reverence, same with touch. And, you know, whether he's drinking a cup of tea, I remember sitting down and have a talk and have tea. And, you know, he didn't do it with any haste or anything. He would very carefully make the tea, not with tea bags, but in the strainer. And then he would smell it, and then he would taste, and then he would decide and comment and so on. And in a way, it was like that with so many things. And it was as if his senses kind of had layers to it, you know, one layer of sensory information was not enough for Ralph. He never took anything for granted as that I ever saw, you know, on a walk or something. Everything was attended to, the people, the houses, the insects, the flower, the car passing by or the cars passing by, the weather across the sky. I think one of the things that I take with the rest of my life is I look harder and I hear harder. All my senses work harder all the time now, and it was always true when I was with him. He took time with everyone. People would come up to him at Vermont and they'd want to ask questions. They'd want to go over something from the day. They'd want to make a comment about something, find out what he thought. And he always gave everybody real, non-judgmental, non-critical time. Everybody got the same time and the same attention from him. And of course, as people have mentioned, besides the humor and so on, was the music. Ralph was music when he was reading. I was at that wonderful reading that David St. John suggested to us that Sarah was talking about at Borders. And David said, you know, you got to go to this reading. You've got to hear this guy. And everybody was kind of blown back into their chairs by the time it was over, and it was just a sensational introduction. But, you know, there was music everywhere. There were the Byrds, and there was always the jazz and blues. We both loved Bill Evans. There was a chime, maybe a little bell, his voice, his poems, and of course his laughter, which would just erupt and be like a musical instrument. And the music that surrounded him was what I always felt when I was talking with Ralph, is it was like a good concert, you know, everybody and myself, you'd be compelled to lean in, to listen. And it just not only required, but of course gave the most engagement. And we will miss him terribly, but he's here. Hey, Ralph. All right, the next reader is wonderful poet Sholé Wope.
Hi, happy to be here. It's when I think about Ralph, I really don't think about a loss, but I think about the gain that we've all enjoyed in our lives. I met Ralph in Redlands when I was at the time living in Redlands, and he was at the University of Redlands, and I went to another reading, and Ralph was sitting in the back, and we started talking, and we hit it off right away, and we became really good friends. He occupies a really special place in my heart, and I think all of my memories with him are very, very personal. So I don't want to, you know, take your time and share them, but I remember when the first time I met Mary at the Claremont College, and I thought, and I told him, you know, you gotta marry this girl. Don't lose her. And I thought, what a fantastic name that would be, Mary Angel. I mean, wow, what a name. You got to keep this girl. Anyway, Mary, I love you. And we share this beautiful memory of him, all of us. And I'm really touched, and I'm just going to try not to cry here. Okay, so I'm going to read a poem also from Anxious Latitudes. And I'll try not to cry, okay? A change in order. I remember distinctly my own infancy, clearly as a photograph or an old woman's story, or the rain-drenched interior of my body. And yet we rise each morning and begin from scratch as the desert rises beneath the city, sand specks in our coffee. In the streets of my world, the sound of the engine, of birds and footsteps and fragmented voices streaming toward uneven horizons. All the people I don't see fall into me and become the same person. Each object, every other object, and the hillsides vibrate the sound. But what I pick out and what selects me means more. The way powers of the universe are concentrated into tiny gestures, a shaft of light, a broom leaning in a doorway, supporting the entire tenement. Everywhere I go, the same tension, the same incredible basket of oranges. I can't say how the butcher's hands have come to be so raw, or why I'm trying to make them familiar like some vein or tendon of memory. But if I don't keep myself from letting them in, then I'm not even out here taking a walk. Among the blurred pedestrians, the perspiring mailman, the woman who can't hide behind bags of tortillas. I owe them their freedom. Even as friends come to me for shelter, they are stronger and healthier when they leave. It is now 10:30 in the morning, and it is twilight. In a pale school dress, a dark-haired girl sits on a curb, arranging pieces of glass in the palm of her hand. I look directly at her side, a pair of rubber sandals, a dog prancing diagonally across the street, oak tree and sycamore, a boy on a bicycle screaming by. I'm sorry. I've been trying not to cry this whole time, and then here I am breaking down. I'd like to now introduce our beloved David St. John, very good friend of our dear Ralph.
Thank you, Sholay, for that beautiful reading. And thanks to everyone for these really quite extraordinary readings of Ralph's poems. The poet Michael Waters said in the chat box how everyone was reading from such a deep place in Ralph's poems. And it's so true. And you've all heard that place. When I moved to Los Angeles almost 35 years ago now, the poet Charles Wright, who's a friend, wrote to me and he said, first thing you have to do is meet Ralph Angel. And I can't do Charles's Tennessee drawl, but he said, you guys are gonna be like brothers. And I thought, brothers, and I didn't get what he meant until I met Ralph. And, as he predicted, we were for 34 years like brothers. It's so wonderful to be here today with so many people who love Ralph. And not just the people who are reading, but so many of you who are watching as well. So many of Ralph's friends, and so many who've loved his poems. And so many who not only love Ralph, but know what an absolute joy it was to know him, as you've heard. And to know Ralph was pretty much to love Ralph. And to love Ralph was inevitably to love him with that same intensity and passion and curiosity with which he loved the world. And I so miss that gesture he'd make when he'd love something and he'd go like that. And as most of you know from his work, Ralph loved art, and he loved and chose to live within a world of art. Not only poetry, but paintings and film, and of course, as Jan was saying, as Mark said, music as well. And for me, there were few things as satisfying as watching Ralph lean above his turntable and, maybe a scotch in his left hand and his cigarette parked in an ashtray, back in the day. And with the precision of a jeweler, lowering the needle to the vinyl so slowly until the diamond touched the groove. Miles Davis, Coleman Hawkins, McCoy Tyner, Bill Evans, Van Morrison, but always the music of invention and passion. And Ralph loved films of deep passion also. And I'm thinking of his great poem, Decalogue, from his book, Neither World, titled after the extraordinary series of films by Krzysztof Kieślowski. And there was also Ralph's more recent passion for the exquisite films by the Iranian filmmaker and poet Abbas Kiarostami. And in particular, the film, The Wind Will Carry Us, a title that Ralph used for the opening poem to the book, Your Moon. And it's a poem that's not only an homage to Kiarostami, but also a kind of deeply humane Ars Poetica. The final reading of a poem today will be by Ralph. And this was also the final poem of a reading Ralph gave at the University of Redlands on March the 27th, 2014, shortly after Your Moon had first appeared. Here is Ralph Angel reading The Wind Will Carry Us.
And this last poem is an homage to one of my favorite filmmakers, the Iranian Abbas Kiarostami. And this title is one of his titles. It's a pure ripoff. The wind will carry us. Someone has been sleeping. Someone's heading nowhere. This is the winding road. Then there's a solitary tree, and after that, nothing, nothing. If someone asks, say I'm looking for buried treasure. Such a lovely village. You've hidden it so well. I haven't hidden anything. Our ancestors built it here. See that blue window? Near the lady sitting on the steps. Let's go higher. I will show you. Here's your room. We have a sack of apples. We have fresh bread. You won't get another chance like this. On Judgment Day, it's obvious. I'm used to it. I work here. If you stay a while longer, you'll get used to it too. When I was little and someone told me a secret, I always wanted to reveal it. And eventually I did. If you come into my house, O kind one, bring me a lamp and a window through which I can watch the crowd in the happy street. I'm sorry to disturb you. You're welcome. This is my normal route. Thank you, guys.
So Ralph. And now, to close the event today, here's Mary Angel.
Hi, everyone. Well, I made it through most of it without crying. Sorry. I would really like to thank all of you for sharing your beautiful stories. I mean, I meant what I said in the beginning. As soon as the pandemic opens up the world again, I would really love to come and meet all of you who I've never met before. Some of you aren't reading today. I know some of you are in the audience, because even though I haven't met you, I do know you a little because of how Ralph spoke about you and the wonderful stories he told me, funny stories. And I appreciate all of you today for sharing stories and reading in such a really heartfelt way. And you made me laugh, some of your stories, and I think I have pictures of some of those Halloween costumes, Molly. And some of what you said made me cry, but gosh, I don't know about any of you, but I really feel like he's here. I really feel his presence from all of your love. I thank you so much. I want to thank Quentin and Jimmy for your for hosting this event and being so kind and caring and treating it with such love, and for putting up with all my 7,000 questions. But we pulled it off. Technically, it was beautiful too, so thank you. I want to thank David and Jim and Helena for all of your planning and for helping to be hosts of this. I also want to thank some behind the scenes people who helped me, to Tim Sauter, the videographer, who helped me put together all of those photos in a way that they could be shared on a virtual reality. I couldn't do a slideshow with a projector, but he helped me do that. And I want to thank Shannon Helford and her team at the Grindstone Group for working day and night to get Ralph's new website ready for today, so that anyone who wants to go there and just see him, read a bit more about him, it's another way that we're going to keep his legacy alive. So it is ralphangel.com, but since it was literally just released and went live today, try going to ralphangel.online if you go to .com and you can't get there yet. It's kind of, being released, but please check it out. Also, panelists, I guess if everybody wants to turn on your video, the panelists, and unmute yourself, we can all just gather together for another moment before we close the event. So thank you. I really did love all of your readings, all of your poems. I'm learning more about Ralph every day from people telling me their stories, and just hearing you all read his work just kind of was wonderful. It was wonderful. What can I say? So thank you, my dear friends. Thank you.
Hang in there, Mary.
I will.
Thank you, Mary. We love you.
Thank you.
Wonderful. Yeah. Wonderful. Wonderful memorial, Mary.
Yeah.
Really moving.
It was a beautiful tribute, right?
It was gorgeous.
Very nice.
Thank you so much, Mary. Thank you.
Thanks, Jen.
Loved hearing all the variations of poems. And of course, seeing him read at the end was astonishing.
Yes, I know. I loved that. I mean, I listened to so many of recordings of interviews and saw so many videos and looked at so many photos. It was one of those mixed blessings that made me feel closer to him, and then I'd have to just get up and walk away because it was just a little too much at times. But we are so lucky, we are. I just wish I had as many years with him as some of you. I had such a short time in the span of a life, but he's the love of my life. So.
Well, you guys, I've told you this before, Mary. Ralph just absolutely transformed when he met you. The years that he spent with you at the last of his life, I knew Ralph to be almost a different person.
Thank you, Mark.
I think you meant the world to him, and he was this kind of illuminated by your love, and he'd be very grateful for all that you're doing for his memory and legacy.
Yeah,
Thank
you. The quality, Mary. You had an incredible. He told me in private that he adored you. He loved you, and I thought, how wonderful, much.
It was pretty incredible. Yeah. And I'm lucky. I'm lucky just that I had that, X number, however many years that you have of Ralph in your life, you're blessed, you know.
And Mary, he was very lucky to have you. You filled his heart and life with so much deep joy. It was obvious every time I saw him and you together. He deeply, deeply, deeply loved you. And he was so happy to have you in his life.
Thank you, dear. Thank you. I'm so glad I got to know you a little bit too.
I know, me too.
All right.
Another one at some point. Keep these things going.
Yeah, I just want to say on behalf of Beyond Baroque, thank you all the readers for being here today. Thank you to our audience also for participating and sharing memories in the chat. And thank you, Mary, especially. And thank you finally too to Ralph himself for the poetry, for everything. I think we should probably go ahead and say goodbye at this point. But thank you all, truly. This has been beautiful. And
thanks, Quentin.
Thank you. Yeah, thanks very much.
And Jimmy, we know you're out there. Thank you.
Thank you all.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Bye. Pleasure to read with you.
Bye, dears.
Thank you, everyone.
Bye-bye.
Bye, David.
Talk soon.
Bye.
Stella.
Good to see each other in person.
Bye, everyone.
Bye-bye. It's beautiful.